Kara Oosterhuis here with RealAgriculture.com. We are back here to live again. You might see it looks a little different. I am based out of my home office today, not in the studio. I'm located in southeastern Alberta, and it is snowing, it is blowing, it is doing all the things. So we stayed off the roads and opted to do this a little different today. So thanks again for joining in. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to bring forward, if you just want to make fun of me, put it in the comment box below. We will get to it, whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, or YouTube. Please give us your comments. We love your interaction. This is why we do this, because it is just so great to see you guys and to be able to have a little bit of that interaction in times that social interaction isn't necessarily everything we get right now. But anyways, let's get to our topic today. I have here with me Ryan Barrett, who's the research and agronomy specialist with the Prince Edward Island Potato Board. We are headed east today, folks, and we are, like I said, here to talk all things potatoes. How is it going today, Ryan?
It's going great, Kara. How are you?
Great. So you are, like I said, way east. You're not seeing any snow. What is the weather looking like over there today?
It's about 20 degrees and sunny here today, so it's fantastic. It's supposed to be nice until Thursday, and then it's supposed to cool off a little, but we're not supposed to get any white stuff for another couple of weeks, I hope. So,
Is that pretty typical for your area?
well, it's hard. There is no typical in the Maritimes. So, yeah, after October 15th, you can get just about anything. We had snow last week that went away in a day, and now it's warm this week, and it could be cold again next week. It's all over the map till April here. So.
Yeah, I mean, really, what can we say is normal these days? Everything is, when it comes to weather, there really is not a lot of normal. So,
No.
speaking of abnormal, you guys had a bit of a drought this year. Can you talk about that and how that impacted your guys' operation?
Yeah, we had a very dry summer, and what made it particularly challenging is it was dry all the way from planting to until sort of September or the last week of August. So it was very good conditions to get everything planted, all the different crops. A lot of stuff went in early. The ground was dry. It was easy to get stuff planted, but then we didn't get the rain that we normally get May, June, July, August, and most parts of the province had at least 50% moisture deficit until sort of the end of August. And then some people caught up a little bit late August, early September. But there's almost all the crops suffered. So we have below average yields in pretty much everything, including potatoes. The potatoes are particularly down in sort of the central part of PEI. So PEI is like a big, long crescent. The west and the east are in decent shape, probably average yield. But the central part, which is the sandiest and also was the driest through the summer, is where we have the most yield loss. So we're looking at, probably 20 to 35% yield loss in a lot of cases there. So, and on a high value crop like potatoes, that's a really big deal. So.
Yeah, and you said month to month you guys get about 3.5 to 4 inches of rain. What sort of rainfall numbers were you looking at this year?
So like May and June, I don't have them right in front of me at the moment, but May and June, there's a lot of people who would have had less than 40 mils of rain each of those months. And then into July and early part of August, we're like, 25 mils and less. So there's some people, there's some growers that told me that they didn't get a rainfall over 10 mils of rain from planting until the end of August. So they were just, getting by on a little bit of whatever was in the soil to begin with and the odd little shower just to kind of buy time. But that does not usually make for a great potato crop.
So what does that do for supply?
So we're figuring like the whole province, we're going to be down. Now we were going to be down because of COVID anyway. Like there was a little bit less planted, and probably demand will be slightly down, especially for processing. But we definitely are going to be short, and we're not alone in that. Most of Canada is looking at a below average potato crop. Maybe outside southern Alberta might be, but the only place that's not really looking at a below average potato crop, which pretty much everywhere else is. So, and particularly the fresh potato market. So there's a big division between processing and fresh potatoes. The fresh potato market is probably particularly tight on supply this year.
So we got our first question in here from Lindsay. She says, how concerned are potato growers about the ongoing pandemic regarding potato demand?
So I would say early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of stress. There's a lot of growers sitting on warehouses full of potatoes that needed to go somewhere. And some of the processors were saying we don't need all these potatoes, and people were getting worried whether they were going to get left with potatoes, that didn't have a home, and they were worried about how much they should plant. In looking at, because unlike grain and a lot of other things, you can't keep it in the bin for another year. You can't keep it in the bin even for another 4 or 5 months. Most of these, certain varieties have different shelf lives, but we can give some of them a birthday, and that's about the most you can get. So 12 months. So it was early days, like March, April. It was pretty stressful, probably. The last, then as we got into the summer and demand for French fries and processed product seemed to recover a bit. Fresh demand was still pretty strong at the grocery store and probably actually increased. So things, are not too bad a shape. A lot will depend on, how does the pandemic continue? Like, how do things progress the rest of the, over the winter and into the spring? How quickly do we get into recovery? How much longer are restaurants closed? A lot of the fast food places, the drive-throughs are still open at McDonald's in most of North America, so they're still selling quite a few French fries. But your sit-down restaurants that do a lot of baked potatoes or do a lot of smashed potatoes, a lot of that food service business, the food service business is definitely struggling. So your big size baking potatoes, that sort of thing, that's the stuff that's maybe struggling a little bit right now. But generally, prices are like the fresh market prices are good, and most of the processors in Canada, most of the processing growers got a bit of a boost in their prices in the spring as well. So that way, it's not too bad.
So, I mean, I was going to wait to ask this, but I feel like my stomach's already grumbling. What is the favorite way, you personally, for you to have potatoes? How do you like to eat them?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I mean, everybody likes French fries, but I really do like a good roasted potato, like a good oven roasted potato with a bit of a crisp skin on it. And particularly good for doing that is like red skin potatoes. They make tremendous roasted potatoes. So that's probably my favorite.
So, what sort of potatoes are we seeing in PEI? Do you guys have different markets of small potatoes and large potatoes, or is it mostly large potato production?
No, we kind of do a little bit of everything. So PEI's been a leader in potato production in Canada for a long time. Has a mature market in terms of different sectors, different markets. So about 60% of our volume of potatoes and our acreage goes to processing. So that's French fries, potato chips, form product like hash browns, that sort of thing. The majority of that is French fries, but there is quite a bit that goes for potato chips. So that's about 60%. About 30% of our acreage would be going for table stock or fresh market potatoes. So that's everything from your little creamers, little tiny potatoes, like Little Potato Company grows here with growers, to your big baking potatoes. So there's lots of variation in the fresh market as well. And then about 10% of our acreage every year goes to seed for the next year's potatoes. So in potatoes, of course, it's a vegetative propagated crop. So you have to, continually growing those that seed for the next year. And it's about an acre of seed grows you between 8 to 10 acres of potatoes the next year. So that's about where we fit every year.
So you're based around Charlottetown right now. Can you talk about some of the disease impacts you guys maybe had this year and what was out there for disease? Probably not too much if it was really dry.
Yeah. So the one benefit of a dry year is that is a good year for blight. So one of the biggest expenses for potato growers in Canada would be managing late blight. And late blight is, of course, late blight's the disease that caused the Irish potato famine back in the 1800s. It's still around. We don't really have curative fungicides for late blight, so we're using protective prophylactic fungicides. And in a normal year, you're spraying every 7 to 10 days, and in a very high blight pressure year, you might be spraying as often as every 5 days. This year, because of the dry weather and not very conducive to late blight, we didn't find any late blight all summer. We run spore trapping programs. We have lots of crops. We have a good crop scouting network that's reporting back. We didn't find any late blight at all this summer, which was fantastic. So that meant that growers were able to probably lengthen their spray schedules a little bit, which then enables them to save a bit of money on fungicide. Some of the other diseases that we have, foliar diseases, early blight, which is also fungal problem. That can be a bit of an issue. Brown spot, white mold once in a while, not so much. Maybe in the rotations that are heavy in soybean or peas or that sort of thing. Black leg is probably getting to be a bigger issue. That's a bacterial problem. Seeing a little, and that's something you just got to live with. Once you have black leg, yeah, you got to either rogue it out or live with it. So those are some of the more above ground plant diseases. And then we have issues like Verticillium wilt is a big issue, and a lot of people around here would call it early dying. So it's a complex of verticillium fungus and root lesion nematodes that chew on the roots and allow verticillium to come up into the plants and clog up the plants, and particularly in dry weather, it's particularly bad. So this year, a lot of susceptible varieties that were under a lot of drought stress, and then after they did get rain, they weren't able to uptake a lot of that water because they're clogged full of verticillium spores, and then they die early. They start dying in August and early September instead of waiting until August or October. So early dying and that sort of verticillium wilt is a massive yield robber for us. And then wireworm is a big issue as well. It's not quite as bad the last year or so. This year wasn't a great wireworm year, but the last 2 or 3 years haven't been quite as bad. As 4 or 5 years ago, wireworm was like really, really bad. But I think growers are adapting production practices. They're adapting their rotations. They're adapting lots of different things to try and manage wireworm, and it's having an effect.
So why is wireworm specifically so bad for potatoes? Can you talk a little more about control methods even?
Well, so the species of wireworms that we have here in Prince Edward Island are predominantly European wireworms, the Agriotes genus, and there's 3 different ones, but particularly Agriotes sputator, and they're very aggressive and very resistant to insecticides. So in other parts of North America, and particularly the prairies, a lot of the native wireworm species can be controlled by neonics, or at least, if not killed by neonics, at least it keeps them calmed down. Whereas neonics have negligible effect on our wireworm. They're very resilient. So we don't have a lot of chemical options. And the one chemical option that's registered right now that most growers are using is Thimet, and it's old chemistry, and it's a pain to use, and it's not a lot of fun. So you're really only using it on your, on fresh market stuff that you can't have any damage on, or your worst fields. There has just been a new BASF chemical that's been approved. It hasn't, it just got approved here in the last month. We're hoping it'll be available for next year. It's a new chemistry, but So we don't have a ton of insecticide options, and of course, their wireworms are under the soil, right? So applying an in-soil insecticide is difficult. It has its challenges. So the other big thing with our wireworm is they have a 4 to 5 year life cycle. So the larval wireworms are resident in the soil for like 4 and 5 years, which means they live through multiple host crops, multiple tillage. They are pretty indestructible, and then once they start emerge as click beetles, start laying eggs, lay thousands of eggs, and then we've got a whole new crop of wireworm. So for a long time, our rotations in PEI were very much potatoes, grain, and then underseeded with forage. Those grain and forage crops were ideal habitat for hatching and developing wireworm. So now we're seeing more changes in the rotations, particularly in the areas that are the worst off for wireworm. So the South Shore PEI, where we're sort of seeing the rotations change a little bit there to take that into account. And then there's been a lot of really good work done here by our friends at Agriculture Canada, looking into wireworm, looking at the biology and the life cycle of wireworm, but particularly looking at IPM strategies. And one of the big things that they've done is looking at crops like mustard and buckwheat for battling wireworm. And growing both of those crops seems to have an impact on reducing wireworm numbers and damage if you grow it the year before potatoes. So we're up to probably 15,000 acres a year of each of those crops being grown in PEI. 15,000 between the two, probably around 7,000 to 8,000 each one, particularly in areas where the wireworm damage is really economically bad.
So taking a little step back to disease, you were talking about verticillium and blackleg. Now, I'm most familiar with this in canola. How does it impact the potato? Is it the same sort of idea as how it impacts canola?
It's a little bit different just in terms of it, but it's probably analogous. The verticillium species that's particularly bad in potatoes is Verticillium dahliae, and it seems to be most aggressive on potatoes, less aggressive on other crops. And the main problem is that it just sort of clogs up the roots, it clogs up the plumbing, as I like to say, with the growers of the plants. And it just means that they can't uptake water, causes the plants to senesce early when they're still bulking tubers. And so then it mostly has an impact on reducing tuber size, which reduces tuber yield. So, normally we'd like to see, in an ideal year, a lot of our potatoes would be full, alive and green and bulking into mid-September. Whereas if they're very heavily impacted by Verticillium wilt, then they're going to start going down in August and like 2, 3, 4 weeks early, particularly in a dry year. And then, it can rob, 30 to 50% yield, in certain fields and certain varieties. So we're doing quite a bit of work with varieties that are a little more resistant to verticillium and nematodes, and as well as trying to look at, again, what are things that we can do to control those soil-borne pests. So particularly around crop rotation, biofumigant crops, those sorts of things.
So we got another question, changing gears a little bit here. A question from Gerard, who is watching on Facebook. Where do you source your seed?
So probably about 3/4 to 80% of the seed in PEI is grown in PEI. So we have a high generation seed farm that's owned by the growers that we manage here at the Potato Board. It's in Fox Island, which is in Western PEI. And that's where we do the tissue culture and early generation nuclear seed. And then that goes out to a series of elite seed growers that would be growing sort of the pre-elite and elite one seed. And then that's going out to another set of seed growers that's then bulking that up. Seed bulking up or seed generation in potatoes is a 4 to 5 year process most of the time, from tissue culture to the generation that you're going to plant for a commercial crop. So it's definitely a process. But we have some specialized seed growers in PEI. We have some growers that they grow seed and commercial, and then we have a lot of people that are just commercial growers. So there's kind of a hybrid approach there. Then the other sort of, I'm going to say 25% of the seed that we grow or that we would use comes from Western Canada, comes from Quebec, comes from some from the United States, maybe certain varieties. Not very much comes from the United States, but Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, that sort of thing.
Awesome. So I have another question here. Is the island at all at risk of losing acres to the rest of Canada in the long term?
I wouldn't say that we're at risk of losing acres in terms of acres not being grown here and being grown in other places. There's more expansion potential in places like Alberta and on Manitoba, just because they're massive provinces with massive acreages. And PEI there's only about 650,000 arable acres in PEI. So we can only plant so much of it a year to potatoes. We're not making more land. So there's only so much that we can plant and do it sustainably. So we're at about 85,000 acres of potatoes a year in PEI, which is probably a fairly sustainable number for us. I don't see it going massively up or massively down in the next number of years. That's probably where we'll be. Where we'll hopefully see improvements is in yields. So if we can improve our yields each year, then we don't have to be growing massive acreages to get that. But I mean, I'm quite sure that some of the other provinces, particularly the Alberta and Manitoba, where there's been new processing plants built in the last number of years, that sort of thing, they will see more acreages. But PEI continues to be, we're definitely a leader in table stock production and fresh market production, and we're still the biggest potato growing province in Canada, at least up until this year anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you see any pressure from environmentalists on water policy, and is that impacting potatoes?
Most definitely. So PEI is densely populated. We don't have, it's not a big province and not a big population, but it's fairly densely populated. We don't have any big rural areas with nobody living in them. And so we're farming in people's backyards a lot. And agriculture is the number one industry here. It is seen as, everybody sees it driving by every day. One of the bigger challenges here in the last number of years is we have a lot of growers that would like to invest more in irrigation for supplemental purposes, not for all year, all season irrigation, because a lot of years we have enough water, but they would like to invest in supplemental irrigation. There's currently a moratorium on drilling more wells for supplemental irrigation here, and it's only targeted at farming. It's only targeted at agriculture. You can drill a well for a golf course. You can drill a well for a car wash, that sort of thing, but you can't to water potatoes or any other crop. So, and that's entirely political. It's not based on science. All of the all the hydrogeological information that we have from our Department of Environment and Department of Agriculture tells us that we have a big annual recharge. We have sufficient water to do it responsibly. And unfortunately, it's hard to access water for irrigation here. So that's why less than 8%, I think, of our crop is irrigated each year, which, compared to Manitoba and Alberta, those are well over the grand majority of potato acres in those provinces are irrigated. PEI, it's less than 10%. So we're very much at the whim of changing climate and dry years and that sort of thing. So, our industry is working on how do we get responsible access to water. We want it to be responsible access. We want it to be done properly permitted, properly tracked, all that sort of stuff. But just trying to get that done is a process. It's definitely a political process.
So speaking of prairies, like you're often comparing PEI to Manitoba and Alberta, are your soils similar to prairie soils, or are they deficient in particular nutrients?
I would say our soils are very different. So we have naturally acidic soils here in PEI. So our average soils would be between about 5.8 and 6.5 on a lot of our fields, and there'd be some that'd be less than that. And then where our soils are naturally deficient in calcium, naturally deficient in selenium, naturally deficient in magnesium to a degree. And they're sandy loam soils towards the sandy. So they're very leachable soils. So if we have nitrogen that's left over from, say, the previous year, that's going to be mostly all gone by the next year. So we don't have resident nitrates over the winter. So fertility and nutrient management is a big is a big thing in terms of make sure we're not leaching nitrates to groundwater and we're being sustainable that way. Our soils are very high in aluminum and also because and high in iron. That's what makes our red soils red is iron oxide. So that binds a lot of phosphorus, and so we probably have to use a little higher phosphorus rates than most people would like, just because a lot of it in certain soils is very tightly bound. So there's very few parts of the island where we would have what we would call a clay type soil. The western PEI around O'Leary would have a little bit more clay than the rest of the province, but compared to what you'd have in, say, the Red River Valley or a lot of places in Alberta, it's completely night and day.
So that moves me into kind of our next segment here. You've been doing a lot of work with crop rotations, with cover crop work. Can you talk a bit about that and how that's been impacting your soils?
Yeah. So again, I talked a bit about some of our diseases, and some of the diseases we manage are most of them are soil borne. The ones that are the pests and diseases that are the biggest issue are soil borne, and we're learning that managing those diseases is probably most effective through crop rotation. We don't do soil fumigation here in PEI either, so managing things like verticillium and wireworm through beneficial crop rotation has proven to be have some advantages. Plus, we have a lot of growers that are really trying to work on building soil organic matter because they're trying to build that resiliency to dry weather. So, in the last 20 years, we've probably seen our average organic matters go down a bit, largely due to a decline in the livestock industry in PEI and a sort of a decoupling from of crop agriculture from livestock agriculture. So we're trying to improve that again by growing crops that'll help build organic matter in the short and the long term, decreasing tillage, and returning nutrients and returning organic matter back to the soil. So we're doing a lot of work. I said before, sort of the traditional PEI potato rotation for years and years and years used to be potatoes and then barley, and then the barley was underseeded with like red clover, and then the red clover was taken off, maybe one crop for hay, and then maybe mulched or something like that, and then back into potatoes. We're seeing the red clover seems to be multiplying our problems with verticillium and with nematodes and with common scab and with wireworms. So we have a lot of guys going away from red clover, and which is difficult because red clover is good for organic matter. It's good for fixing nitrogen. It's cheap. So looking at other types of rotation. So we've got people doing things like with sorghum, Sudan grass, and pearl millet, which are being used to build organic matter, fight compaction. Pearl millet is a non-host for root lesion nematodes, so it seems to be having some benefits there in terms of increasing yields in the potato crop. We're seeing more people getting into non-clover forages like alfalfa and other grass mixes. I talked about mustard and buckwheat before, either just as a cover crop or as an incorporated green manure for fighting some of these soil-borne pests and diseases. So definitely seeing a more diversity of different crop rotations on I'm going to call them the soil building crops. But then we're also seeing a lot more use of alternative commercial crops. So there's more mustard being grown for seed here. There's more peas being grown here, black beans, a little bit of canola, not very much. This year, I've never seen so many carrots being grown in PEI as there was this year. We've seen an increase in corn acres, grain corn, particularly with more corn varieties that are shorter season varieties, need fewer heat units that are more adapted to our PEI growing conditions. So yeah, we're seeing more diversification in our systems, and seeing less tillage, more cover cropping, putting a big push on for fall cover cropping, both following potato harvest, but also ahead of potatoes, like after tillage, but before potatoes. So seeing a lot more uptake on that the last couple of years, and we're really pushing growers, and they're responding in terms of doing a lot more on cover crops. And cover cropping is a lot easier to pencil out, I think, on potatoes, because again, it's a higher value crop. So if it costs you $30 or $40 an acre to do cover cropping in a grain or a soybean or a wheat system, the payback on that might be longer. Yeah, there's long-term benefit to soil erosion and those, or preventing soil erosion, but the actual immediate payback on yields is maybe not as great. But in a high value crop like potatoes, where we're talking about an average yield of 300 hundredweight per acre per year, so 30,000 pounds per acre per year. If you increase by 5% on that, you are more than paying for the cost of the cover cropping. So in a vegetable sort of higher value crop, I think cover cropping is even easier to pencil out, and so I think that's why we're seeing more and more people doing it.
Absolutely. It's very interesting research, and it's cool to see where it's going. I find it fascinating, especially, I don't know what it is about carrot harvest. I mean, we don't grow carrots on large scale here. I grow them in my garden, but carrot harvesters that are so cool to watch. I think they're really neat. So it's cool to hear that carrot production is up for sure. Just kind of see the differences and the importance of doing that. So we do have one more question here. We are quickly running out of time. It always goes by so fast, but it's from Jama, and he says, "What are the solutions to very acidic soil?"
So the majority of our growers would be, if they have acidic soil, they're applying lime at least once a rotation. So either calcitic or high mag lime, and trying to match that the right amount to how much you want to change the acidity change the pH is a sort of is a bit of an art, almost more than science sometimes. One of the big challenges, or one of the things that people are trying to balance here, is acidic soils are better for not having scab, which is caused by bacteria, and that generally makes potatoes unmarketable. So if you have scab seems to be correlated with soil pH. So the higher the pH, the more likelihood you're going to get scab, at least in Prince Edward Island. So trying to find that right balance between, you don't want your fields to be too acidic, or your nutrient uptake is going to be poor, and yields are going to suffer. But if your pHs are too high, then sometimes you can get into problems with scab. So it's trying to find that balance. But most people are definitely liming on a regular basis. And we're also finding, with more use of vertical tillage and less use of moldboard plowing in our potato rotation, we're seeing less, the pHs probably aren't declining as fast. So then you don't have to be adding quite so much lime on each rotation.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that is unfortunately all we have left for time today. It's been great. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much, Ryan, for your time. I've really appreciated all your wealth of information.
Oh, thanks very much for having me. And anybody can
Awesome.
feel free to follow me on Twitter. I try and post lots of photos and videos of stuff that I'm seeing in the fields here in PEI.
And what's your Twitter handle if they want to follow you?
It's R Barrett PEI.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Okay, thanks,
Thanks
Kara.
Thanks everyone for tuning in today. It's always so much fun. I love getting to talk to you guys and to talk all things that are impacting agriculture here. So be sure to check into now that we're done with this for today. Be sure to check into Rural Radio 147 at 2:30 p.m. We will 2:30 p.m. Mountain Time, that is, or 4:30 Eastern, I believe now with the time change. Anyways, thank you very much for tuning in. It's been great having you along for the ride, and I look forward to our next conversation. Just keep in mind tomorrow, it is Remembrance Day, so we will not be streaming. However, we will be back on Thursday. I'll be your host again, and we will have Chuck Penner on to talk about the markets. So that'll be a good conversation. Be sure to tune in for that. Thanks again, everyone.